What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another live stream here on the Sergeant Tank YouTube channel. As you can see, we got a special guest here with us tonight, Chris Carpenter with us. He's actually the vice president of our club, which is the Grand Valley Aquarium Club here in the Grand Rapids, Michigan market. And we're going to be really focusing on some different lineage and species of shell dwellers, because that is something that you've done several talks throughout the U.S. at this point. What, probably close to 15 or...
Yeah, I think 15 is the number.
What got you started in fish keeping?
So, for the most part, I had some fish tanks growing up as a kid, but nothing really stuck. At the point where it did stick with me was my first son was born. He was about 1. My wife bought him a fish tank, and I kind of... 1 fish tank for her turned into 2 fish tanks, and then it turned into 3 and 4. I was mainly picking out fish to put into the aquariums and not really doing much with maintaining them, because my main hobby at that time was drinking. So I just kind of had fun picking out fish, but it got really serious for me when I decided to quit drinking and using drugs. And once I did that, it was like I swapped liquid addictions. I just picked right up with the hobby and spent all my time researching, of course, getting my fix. Every time I breed a fish, it's like a new high for me. So that's pretty much how I got way into it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yes, thank you for sharing. That's definitely an inspiration. And what I enjoy about that is the transparency. As anybody that's been following me long enough knows the issues that I've also gone through myself. Why shell dwellers?
So when I started getting into fish, of course, breeding them was the coolest thing. And I started off bred cichlids, the Cyprchromis pulper. Really loved it, and I kept going up to the local fish store by me, and I was seeing these fish with these long flowing tails, and they were Neolamprologus Multifasciatus from Lake Tanganyika. I fell in love with them, had to have them, brought them home, and they were really kind of nasty. And for me, being new into the hobby, I really didn't know much about how to deal with cichlid aggression. So I went back up and I ended up trading them in for some Lamprologus Multifasciatus. Now those guys, I instantly fell in love with them. They had some super interesting behaviors, and they would breed, and I didn't have to remove babies or anything. They would have these big communities with multiple generations of fry all in with them, so it was awesome.
That $1 million question everybody asks, okay, if I want to get into a shell dwelling type species, what would be the recommended ideal setup in maybe your top 2 or 3 species that you would recommend, either for a beginner coming in or coming back into the hobby, even for somebody that's somewhat advanced or intermediate into the hobby, maybe
Sure.
hasn't kept that type of fish?
So setup wise, tank size, I recommend going with like a 20 long. You can keep just about any one of the shellies in a 20 long. I've kept, matter of fact, most of the ones I keep now I do in 20 longs or 40 longs, or I even have a 100-gallon at home just filled with shellies. But you can do them in a 10-gallon as well. There's certain things I would recommend if you are going to keep them in a 10-gallon, which is don't keep a large group. Go with a pair, or if it's one of the species that is like a harem spawner, go with 1 male and 2 females. But personally, I would just go with a single pair if you're going to do a 10-gallon. Matter of fact, most of them that I do, even if they're a harem spawner, I do a single pair in a 20-gallon.
Sure.
And I always recommend sand in every one of them. If you don't go sand, you're not going to see some of their most interesting behaviors, which,
Sure.
I mean, Shellies are known for redecorating an aquarium to how they like it. So if you're a huge aquascaper and it really drives you nuts if your fish are going to change stuff around, don't get Shellies.
Sure.
But if you want to see super interesting behaviors, grab
Makes
some
sense.
Shellies. I mean, they're
Right
really
on.
neat. And as far as species I would recommend, Multifasciatus, it's the one I started off with. They do the digging like crazy. They're gonna display the really cool behaviors. They're, for the most part, they're not aggressive with one another. I mean, sure, they're cichlids, so they can do a little bit, but really the ideal beginner species, it would be Multifasciatus or even Lamprologus similis.
Okay.
Which is very similar,
Sure.
hence similis. So, I mean, really, just because the way some people get fish to grow faster than what other people do, I mean, it depends a lot on food quality, water change, and how often you're doing that. I go by size for breeding. So these fish would be known, well, okay, they're known or have been known for a long time as the smallest cichlid in the world. Females top out just over an inch, males close to 2 inches, but recently in Amazonas magazine, I've seen there's a new West African Cyprchromis minor, which is, there's some debate going on now that they may actually be the smallest cichlid in the world. So, but I would say once you see a pair start to form up, if the female is close to an inch, I mean, it doesn't take long for a fish to grow to an inch long. I would start looking for babies.
Okay.
And shell-wise, one of my favorites to use is just Escargo Shells. So Escargo Shells can be found, you can buy them on eBay, find them on the internet. I've seen them at Walmart. I've bought them through like a local specialty food shop. Of course, then you get the escargot as well, which nobody wants that crap. I mean, who's eating that?
Sure.
But the shells that they use in the wild are really hard to come by in the hobby. I do have about 30 or 40 of those shells, but I searched for years and years to get what I have, and about 20 of them I was super lucky that Ham Chin actually went to Lake Tanganyika and sent me back some shells. So, you know, unless you have a friend that's going over to Lake Tanganyika that's gonna send them to you, good luck finding them.
Sure. So, and now as far as like crossbreed or hybridization when it comes to these type of fish,
I mean, I would say, you know, I've seen some crazy hybrids at Lake Tanganyika. So it's possible that really anything can happen, but I would definitely not put Multifasciatus and similis in the same tank together. I did read a crazy article one time where a guy tried it and it never produced anything, but that's not saying that it didn't produce anything. Who knows why they didn't do it, but they look so similar to one another that there's no way I would ever do it unless it was, hey, I wanted to try it too and just see what happens, and then know that those babies were never leaving my house.
Okay.
But and I wouldn't keep there's gold Aussies. I wouldn't keep gold Aussies with black Aussies, or you know, there's a lot of different ones that I definitely would not keep with one another.
Right on.
And quite honestly, I don't recommend keeping any Shellies together in the same tank. Personally, I don't do it. I've tried it before, and I've tried it in a 125-gallon aquarium, and it did not work out real well. One species is usually dominated by another species, because you get, some of them are, even though they're little tiny fish, some of them are super aggressive, while others are a little more passive.
Sure.
So when they're fighting for the same territory in shells, it becomes a problem at some point. I've bought loads of shells from Michael's. They do sell, they have the turbo shells. They sell a big pack. Some of the shells I wouldn't recommend using, like some of the seashells that have a tight spiral that go through, because fish can get stuck in those. Usually I look for, the round seashells, or even some land. You can find land snails as well.
Sure. And now another question as far as PVC.
Yeah, PVC is like, it's the ideal way to catch babies. If you want to breed these fish and you want a very simple way of getting the fish out afterwards, PVC elbows. So they breed and they use them just like they would shells, only when you want to remove them, you just pull it out, pop the thing apart, boom, there goes your baby.
Sure.
Personally, I'm a stickler for having my tanks look natural, so having PVC elbows in there would just look tacky to me.
Yeah.
So
it's fair. Most colorful shell dweller.
Most colorful, I would have to say it's going to be the gold Ocellatus, Lamprologus Ocellatus. There's a few different color morphs, but the golds are super pretty, and they're like my favorite because they're also super spunky. I've got some videos, and every time I put my hand in the tank, they're all over. I mean, they attack my hand. I can put my finger up to the glass, they're attacking the glass. I put my siphon in the tank, they attack the siphon. They're going after my hand. Here, a little 1-inch fish, 1.5-inch fish is going after my hand.
One right here, what is the proper way to pronounce this fish?
This would be Neolamprologus lupi. Not a shell dweller, but a cave spawner. Really pretty fish. And of course, I have seen people breed them in shells, but in the wild, they're not using shells. They're using caves. Super pretty fish. You can get them in a yellow variety, orange variety. Really pretty. So this is Neolamprologus lupi. There is another fish that the name is very similar, and I have to, like, if I post a picture of these on Facebook or something in a Tanganyikan cichlid page, I have to clarify every time I put them. They're Lamprologus laupi, and I have to, and of course, if you just put it with that label, you get 10 people telling you those aren't Lamprologus lupi. Well, no, they're not lupi. They're laupi. Only one letter difference in the name, and so the naming really can throw people off. The lupi are really quite common in the hobby. I mean, you can buy those if you have good local fish shops around. You can get these in. Those laupi, I bought them at an ACA convention, and it's the only time I've ever seen them for sale. And those are not considered a shell dweller. They're another one that would fall under opportunistic shell dwellers. So when I say opportunistic shell dwellers, what I mean is it's a fish that in the wild really kind of prefers a different way of spawning. Like these guys would prefer to use a rock structure. They'd be a cave spawner, but they're also have been known to use shells in the wild. So, and if you had them in your aquarium, I would recommend using shells to breed them. And a matter of fact, when I bred these guys, I use shells to breed them.
What is the appropriate age as far as maturity with this one here that we're looking at when it comes to breeding?
I mean, I would say, 7 to 8 months, somewhere around there. I do it by size.
That would be my follow-up question. Now, if somebody is putting the appropriate time and have the appropriate chemistry as far as water parameters to get them to an appropriate size of breeding, what would at that age, so somebody can identify and be like, okay, if they're not sure on the age just by looking at size, I'm falling in that 7 to 9 month category.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking adult size on these guys is going to be about 3 inches.
We have a good question here from Denny's Aquatics. Now, he is wondering if you're aware of the sumbu compressiceps.
Sure.
And if they mix well with the Altolamprologus as far as the colony.
So the sumbu, it's Altolamprologus compressiceps dwarf. Sumbu is a collection point. The majority of the dwarfs in the hobby are of the sumbu collection point, but there are other dwarfs from different collection points as well. So one thing I find is a lot of people just say, hey, I've got Altolamprologus species sumbu. No, it's actually Altolamprologus compressiceps dwarf from sumbu.
Sure.
And what I would not recommend mixing those with another type of Altolamprologus, if that's what the question was. If it was that, would these Leilaupi or Cautopunctatus go good with sumbus? Yeah, I would say that could definitely be done. That would be a shell dweller in the sumbus and an opportunistic shell dweller with Cautopunx or Leilaupi.
Okay, makes sense.
The Leilaupi are going to be tough to come by, so
sure.
Cautopunx are a lot more readily available.
Now, what would be the appropriate method? A couple of different things that we'll tie together here with regard to once they start developing those lifelong bonds. And let's say you obtain a group of 6 or 8, like I have a group of 6. And once they start doing it, once they start showing some of those breeding behaviors, and then once you get through that first stage of as far as spawning, do you recommend leaving the other groups in there, or go ahead and just leave that bonded pair and then relocate the other ones? And then following in with that, do you recommend any type of dither?
So the Leilaupi that I had, that's the species you're talking about for that.
Yes.
Because a lot of the Shelleys are going to be different.
Yes.
But for the Leilaupi, so what I did was I started with a group of 6, let them pair off, and I kept 2 pair in a 20 long. And I set up one side. I basically split the tank right down the middle because I wanted to see how these fish were going to behave with 2 pairs. And if it wasn't successful, I would have pulled 1 pair and just used 1 pair in that 20. But what ended up happening was they basically had an imaginary line right down the middle of that tank, and they would meet and flare at each other and circle around and then go back, and they both would breed on those sides. Of course, the fry didn't really survive real well in that way because one side would come over and start picking off the other ones.
Sure.
But eventually, I just pulled 1 pair. I sold 1 pair and then kept, matter of fact, I sold that pair to Joe, and then I kept the other pair and let them go.
Okay. And then kind of tying in with that, Candy's wondering now, as far as tank mates, or do you recommend a species only?
Depends really on the size tank. I mean, I do, like I said, I do a lot of 20 longs, and in 20 longs, I do species only. In 10 gallons, species only. But I have a 75 gallon right now with, I have a 40 long right now with the sumbus, and I also have an Antiochus in that tank with them. I have a 100 gallon, 6 foot 100 gallon tank where I have a large breeding colony of Lamprologus similis, and I have Cyprchromis up top.
Okay.
And that's a fish that I recommend a lot for a tank mate, because where your Shelleys are going to take up the bottom of the tank, the Cyprchromis take up the top of the tank, but it needs to be a larger tank. They don't do well in small tanks. They're almost like a rainbow fish where they really need room to swim around. Otherwise, their health just deteriorates.
Yep, right on. Check out the fish room tour that Jeff Rowe actually did over in Chris's fish room. That's already uploaded on his YouTube channel, which a lot of the stuff that you've covered here, you actually discussed in that video as well. And with that being said, you guys always stay encouraged, keep on keeping on, happy fishing, and we'll talk to you guys right back here on the next one.